Hello, friends. I am so excited to tell you about Independent Media Token. Independent Media Token is a brand new way to show your support for independent media without having to donate a dime. Independent Media Token is a cryptocurrency on the Solana blockchain designed to generate funds to promote and foster the growth of independent content creators, allowing them to engage in their art without having to worry about being demonetized. Through a network of media partners, of which you yourself can become a part of, Independent Media Token's goal is to ensure the powers that be can never cut off all of our areas of funding and censor the only free voices left in the world. Join the movement today. You can pick up Independent Media Token using Phantom Wallet or the Solana wallet of your choice, where you can easily swap your Solana for IMT. Grab some IMT today and remember to always know your team. To learn more, visit independentmediatoken.com or use the link right in the description.
I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is. Eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on? It's not enough to say it's nuts. You have to explain why it's so nuts. The invention of artificial life, the cloning of human beings, possible contact with extraterrestrials, the systems which are in place to keep the world sane are utterly inadequate to the forces that have been unleashed.
Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Bill Yarborough. First, we're having our film fundraiser for our third movie. It's going to be a sci-fi comedy mockumentary, a little different than the previous films. We're going to feature many of your favorite researchers, authors, and content creators. If you'd like to help with a donation, we have links in the description. Our films are completely self-funded with the help of your kind donations. Be sure and check out my previous films. Doors of Perception is on Amazon Prime. Occult Louisiana is on Tubi, Roku, Apple, and many more. We're booking guests for February. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Today I want to welcome Bill Yarborough. He is author of Memories of MKUltra, which was inspired by experiences from his early childhood, where he was subjected to experiments from the CIA's MKUltra mind control program. Bill, welcome. How you doing?
Doing great. Thank you. Appreciate the invitation to be on your show.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for coming on. Today we're going to share your experiences as a child in the MKUltra program. This is a topic I've covered many times before with others that have also claimed to have been involved with either MKUltra or similar projects. And this is an extremely multi-layered and controversial topic. It seems to involve not only three-letter agencies, but a virtual web of intelligence, military, corporate, and scientific interests. It goes deep, and looking at the reality that surrounds us now, the technological age that we're immersed in, the level of degraded morality, and overall direction that humanity is headed, some would say that the entire planet is victim to these operations on some level or another. So there's a lot to get to with this. Before we do, this is your first time on. Tell us just a little about yourself and let the audience know how they can find out more.
Okay. Well, my brother, sister, and I were in the MKUltra program during the summer of 1958. Actually, our memories of the program were repressed for about 30 years. And then in our young adults, they began to come back in fragments and such. Now, one of the things that was lucky for me and them as well is, by definition, some of these memories are very strange. And so when you remember these on your own, but you don't have anybody to collaborate it with, I think it's a lot more difficult. But I did. and we began to remember things independently. For example, we each independently remembered that we had been kept in jail cells in a basement of this building. And uh, and once we really developed techniques to test each other's out, our first memory block collapse really didn't involve MK Ultra. It involved a sort of psychotic period my mother went through in the late 50s that lasted a few months, and where she threatened us with a knife and things of that nature. And that was the first memory that broke. And when my sister and I began to compare notes, we immediately went to, okay, let's fill in the memory completely on our own and then share to see if it's the same memory. And like, where were you standing? Where was I standing? Where was she? What was she doing? And so we were able to, realize that we had the same memory. And ultimately, that memory my mother completely admitted to sometime later that totally confirmed it. But we used that same technique as MK Ultra began to break. I did want to talk a little bit about why we were put in the
Of
program.
course.
I think that's important. So I think many of your viewers know a lot about MK Ultra, but you probably know that the war after World War II, Operation Paperclip was created by the U.S. government, and they interviewed the Nazi talent. Of course, Werner von Braun is the most famous member that was recruited from that. His mother was actually my mother's
Oh,
godmother.
wow. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. My mother grew up in Nazi Germany. Her father was a general in the army, and she was in Dresden, Germany during the firebombing downtown. So I heard lots of war stories from her. And I think that those kind of experiences contributed to the kind of psychotic episode she went through in the late 50s. After she got through that, they never came back. She was fine. Uh, but more significantly, because I don't know that the Werner von Braun connection really led us at all into MK Ultra, but the next connection did. My father, sister had married a German. My father was in the U.S. Army during World War II. And when the war was over, he wanted to stay and visit his sister because she had four kids. She had lost her husband in the war. He was one of the first German officers to die in World War II. So he felt he needed to stay there. So he joined the War Crimes Branch of the U.S. Army. And then he was stationed in Dachau to interview the SS officers who ran the death camps. And actually, that's where Hitler conducted a number of the mind control experiments that were done in Nazi Germany. And so they did. I don't know if you're familiar with Stephen Kesner's book, Poisoner in Chief. It's an excellent book about MK Ultra, and he points out how they recruited all these individuals, biochemical, of course, the rocket engineers, as well as mind control, and brought them to the United States. So we actually lived in Maryland. You probably know that MK Ultra was headquartered in, at that time, Camp Dittrich, Maryland, later to become Fort Dittrich. That's what they also did biological weapons research. So we believe that he somehow reconnected with these people that he was probably involved in bringing over. And then they got us into the program. They knew these Nazi, before we even made that connection, we clearly remembered that there seemed to have been somebody with heavy German accents, and based on their behavior that we witnessed, was more than capable of working at a death camp. A very, very brutal individual, a sociopath with no hesitation to actually kill kids. And I did witness that on an occasion. And so in Kesner's book, he talks about 5 different programs, not in depth, but mentions them involving kids. A lot of the publicity about MK Ultra really has dealt with the adults and all the different things that were done to people within the CIA and outside of the CIA. And we, obviously the universities. But they did do electric shock. My sister was caught up in the late 60s drug revolution, very much so. So she used all kinds of psychedelics in her youth. She stopped, when she became older, but she knew what those experiences were like. And as these memories began to come back, she was 8 at the time, older than me. I was only 4. She said, these experiences are that I'm remembering when we were kids are like what I went through, in the late 60s, the psychedelic experiences and so forth. So we're pretty certain we were given those drugs, isolation, the jail cells. And so it was very similar to the things you've heard about, that not to the radical degree that Dr. Erwin Cameron did, at the Allen Memorial Institute, but similar things to children. And so, but again, as I mentioned, the memories were repressed for 30 years before they began to come back. And
do you know what age you were initially brought into the program and how long you stayed there?
We have estimated that. My sister knew that it was the summer of 1958, May, June, and July. My sister she remembered being an outgoing, popular student, 1 year. And then the next year, when she went back to school after the summer, she was kind of a shadow of what she was, shy, didn't talk. Of course, I was preschool, so I didn't, I wasn't having schooling experience. She also always remembered she couldn't remember that summer. It was like a blank slate. She just woke up one day and, what happened over the last 3 months? So actually, my mother took lots and lots of pictures of us at that time. And she had this big trunk, and where they were developed, they would put the date that it was developed. So I knew that, of course, we were young adults. I was no longer at my parents' house, but as these memories came back, I remembered, in that trunk, she's got all these pictures with all these dates on them. So I went back home and went through the pictures from 1958, a lot of pictures in January, February, March, April, and then nothing for the next 3 months. And then once again, starting in late August, all the way through the rest of the year, lots of pictures. So those kind of techniques we've used to estimate that's when we think we were there. We were lucky in that we were only there for, that 3 months period. I know others who have been subjected to MK Ultra, went through much longer experiences. So that was fortunate. We also, as you know, they were very interested in psychedelics, and one of the reasons why I've made this book a novel is because of the fact that, one, we were young, the memories were repressed, and some of our recollections are pretty strange. So when you're given psychedelics and then you're subjected to extreme trauma, you tend to disassociate, which of course can create paranormal experiences in and of itself. So I decided to make it a novel because I couldn't be certain, of things. But basically, much of it is, as far as the experiences we had, is based on that. The novel really deals with what it's like to grow up and be messed up and not know why. And so we have 2 timelines of the novel. One is the kids growing up, through elementary, junior high, college, and then young adults. And then another one from the point of view of the guy who ran the program. So the reader knows what happens to the kids. So it really gives you some ideas about the unconscious, subconscious mind, how it influences behavior and things of that nature.
You said you were 4 years old whenever you first started to recall some memories. Is that correct?
No, I was 4 years old while I was in the program. And I didn't start to remember them until I was like 34.
I see. What was that process like, remembering? Was there anything specific that started to trigger that?
Sure. I was visiting my sister, and she literally had a vision. At that time, she described it as a vision from God. And it told her that you, as young children, have repressed some very important things that happened to you, and you need to remember, and that you're life is at a certain crossroads. And if you remember these things, you're going to begin to move in a new direction, implying that would be a better direction, that we were actually headed in a dark direction. And she got too terrified and she couldn't remember. And she says, I just can't. And the vision said, well, that's fine. If you wake up your brother and tell him, he will begin to remember.
Wow.
So she actually did. And I began to get flashbacks immediately after she mentioned this vision. I mean, I knew she was psychic. She had had some pretty phenomenal psychic experiences. So, and I began to get flashbacks of our mother holding a knife, and that was, so the next morning, we began to share, she asked me if I remembered anything, and then I mentioned the knife, and then she actually right away, and she says, okay, I just had a flash of that, but let's not fill up each other's memories, because she was familiar with the false memory syndrome. She'd read about that in the past, and fill it in. And as I said, we had the same memory. My brother, we ultimately brought him into it, and he had the same memory, and my mother confessed the same memory. And it was a couple of years later, though, that the MK Ultra stuff began to emerge. I think they monkeyed with my parents' mind. I think that could have been part of the reason why she had this.
I was going to ask you about that, if that was an isolated incident or if she was normally somewhat abusive.
It was unisolated, but it wasn't an incident. It was a period that ran on for several months. I mentioned that. So yeah, she was just very, very. My brother later became, unfortunately, my sister and I survived this somewhat better than my brother. My brother was normal until he was 23, but then when he was 23, he had a complete psychotic breakdown. And he began to say things that sounded very strange to me. I couldn't understand it, But years later, as this stuff began to come back to us, my sister and I began to figure out sort of what was going on with him. And we eventually, with his therapist and, so forth, began to bring these memories up. And it did tend to help him, but he refused to deal with it for years. But when he got back to dealing with it, then he got a good bit better. I think the other thing I would say that, why I think they monkeyed with us is my father's reaction when I confronted him. When I didn't know at the time that it was MK Ultra when I confronted him. We had remembered all of these things, as far as jail cells and electric shock and psychedelics and child abuse. Definitely sexual child abuse was part of it. He said, I don't know what you're talking about. That sounds like a program your mother might have put you in when I was in the Korean War. And I said, well, I wasn't born when you were in the Korean War. You were there. It was the summer of 58. And he goes, I don't know what you're talking about. And then he began to glance over his shoulders, and then he began to whisper, and he had a different voice.
Whoa.
And he began to say, those people who ran that program, and he kept on looking over his shoulders. Nobody else was in the house. My wife knew I was going to bring it up, so she made sure everybody else was gone. And he says, well, those people that ran that program, they were fine people, but they couldn't control their dark impulses. And then he'd go back to his normal voice and said, I don't know anything. And wow. I began to think split. I mean, that's started what came into my mind, and it went back and forth. And, and I told you my sister had psychic gifts. One of them was she was, in another state, but she knew I was going to have this discussion. So when we talked afterwards, she goes, I saw it. I saw you talking to him. And I saw you just going into the state of shock. You just looked stunned. So what did he say?
Yeah.
So he, so again, I think, there could have been other reasons why he would have demonstrated a split. I mean, both my parents had difficult lives. My mother grew up in Nazi Germany. He fought in both the Korean War and World War II, and to interview the Nazis running the death camps, to be there at Dachau had to be very traumatic as well. So, sometimes those people develop aspects of that, but he also, MK Ultra was interested in creating split personalities. I mean, Alan Dulles was particularly interested in that. We don't want American agents revealing secrets. So what can you do to set up our agents where they won't reveal secrets if captured by the enemy?
Yeah.
And they came up with this idea by creating a secondary personality that knew the mission, and the primary personality did not know the mission. And then if captured, the primary personality would have nothing to reveal. In my father's case, I would say that didn't work very well because both personalities showed up at different times and certainly began to demonstrate a knowledge. So yeah, I can't
It
be
would
certain
make
what
sense
caused
because,
that, but
from what I understand, they were experimenting on members of the military, unwilling members of the public, even people from within intelligence that were unaware of some of the things
right.
that were going on. So it really wouldn't surprise me if higher ranking members of the military were also being experimented on in some reason.
Sure. I mean, Frank Olson, you've heard that story. He was
Yeah.
part of it, and Sidney Gottlieb gave him those drugs that he didn't know about, and that's a well-known documented case. We lived right next to a military base
Yeah.
when this went on.
Right.
So, and I know that the intelligence agency of that military base had a pretty big center there. And we lived in Maryland. Maryland's not that big, so I don't think we were kept at Fort Camp Dietrich. I think we were kept in the surrounding area of Maryland. I believe I found the place, but I can't be certain, and so there's multiple aspects to this. There's another very unique aspect to it is, I think you've probably heard the story of Gordon Wasson, who took the magic mushrooms in Mexico. And so the CIA, got this agent, and of course, Watson supposedly didn't know he was from the CIA, James Monroe, and so he went down there to get those magic mushrooms from a ceremony, and they created psilocybin. So they had a strong interest in Sidney Gottlieb. Really has a very good, excuse me, not Sidney Gottlieb, the Stephen Kessler book about Sidney Gottlieb. Really, when it comes to this paranormal stuff, he had some interesting documents and quotes that actually started prior to MK Ultra with Project Bluebird and Artichoke, but then went into MK Ultra, that we want to find a gateway into these shamans in Mexico say that this drug will give us a gateway into the divine, will allow us to approach the infinite, will allow us to communicate with entities unknown to science. We'll see the future. So, I mean, kind of Stranger Things type stuff, and they were clearly interested in that kind of stuff. So there was a boy that was there with us who was 14 years old that came from a shamanic tribe in Mexico. And he was raised by his shamanic grandmother to become a shaman. So he was already fairly advanced at age 14 and would have had experience with mind-altering plants. And actually, I don't know if you ever heard of the How to Open Your Mind, that book, a kind of scientific book, but it actually said this boy came from the desert of northern Mexico, and it actually said the most powerful hallucinant on the planet comes from there, from toad venom. And so he, to some extent, protected us, and he sort of brought us on shamanic journeys.
Wow.
I believe. I can't be certain, with being given psychedelics, but he would have known. We were kept in these jail cells, so I think he was brought in. I think they started conducting psychedelic experiments with him. Again, I believe that he realized what they were up to, realized that it was no good, so he acted like they weren't having much of an effect because he didn't want them to know that he was on to them. And so he helped us mitigate the damage that was going on.
Could you give us an example of some of the experiences that made you believe that he was intervening in some way?
Well, yeah. I mean, first of all, we began to remember that he would, when he first showed up, he was very nervous because I think he was very unsettled. But he would play rock and roll music, listen to rock and roll music on the radio. Okay, and then he would he had a little record player that he had all the top hits that he liked, rock and roll hits, Elvis and Jerry Lee Lewis, big people at that time. So he would do what I would call trance dancing. I had begun to remember him. I had begun to have memories of me making these wild movements. I couldn't quite connect what was causing that. And then suddenly I began to listen. I began to remember when I would be on the radio listening to the Golden Oldies station, I would hear certain tunes. And I said, oh God, yeah, he was with us when I heard that. I mean, I could just picture it. So what I did is I bought the top 10 hits from 54 through 58 to see if the songs I were remembering were actually out then. And they were. Wow. So I started listening to them. And in one of them, let's go to At the Hop, I just broke out into this wild dance on my own. As an adult, listening to that music, I heard him say, put your mind in the music. And I took off. And it was like, I'm not controlling this. Something else is controlling this. And then when it was over, I had this just huge spiritual high, like, wow. And so, Native Indians were into trance dancing. So I think he brought us, he was our guard when they realized he wasn't panning out as a psychedelic subject. A lot of them had jobs during the day. They would only, so they weren't, the guy running the program, I think, was a psychiatrist and had a practice, and he would, so this Indian boy would bring us to this places in the house where we could dance to that music, and he had a portable record player. And I just have very powerful memories of that as an example. But I mean, he also, I think the number one thing is that he gave us love and support.
Yeah.
After they would do something to me, like they stuck me in a stove once, they wanted me to believe they were gonna cook me, and I came back, and he would comfort me in the jail cell. So I think that's the most significant thing. And then I mentioned these shamanic journeys, but I think he was, what awakening is, right? Of course, I know you've experienced with that yourself, and I'm into that. When I started talking to my therapist about my memories of this kid and the things that he said and he did, at one point my therapist said, and he was a very good therapist because he'd been in the Army dealing with people with post-traumatic stress, but he also was into mysticism, big into that. And so he said to me, how many Eastern mystic books have you read? And I said, none. I said, I don't even know who Buddha is. And he said, well, you're bringing up some of the deepest mystic principles. And I said, yeah, because I remember the Indian boy. So he was very good to help me. He said, I think this kid was significantly awakened. It's the only way I can explain what you're talking about.
So interesting. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the memories that really stick out for you? What started coming through first, and what's really most powerful for you?
Well, the most damaging was the sexual abuse. Uh, we were trafficked, if you want to use that
Mm.
word. Um, uh, and uh, and I could remember these experiences in great detail of what these men and also a woman and as well did to me. So those were some of the first ones. Um, the electric shock, and we didn't even know it was electric shock. At first, it was just we were terrified of this chair they would have us sit in. And um, I and then they would do these games like they wanted me to be a good student. I should say that a, a bit of this stuff I think was done by these Nazis they had working there. That was not necessarily done with the knowledge of the
Oh,
CIA, and that they had objectives that were not really connected to what the CIA
I
wanted,
see.
because they seemed to be obsessed in wanting me to become president
Huh.
and free Eastern Europe and Eastern Germany, East Germany from Soviet domination.
Interesting. Wow.
And so, I mean, if you think about those guys, that would have been something they were interested in. I know full well that I was interested in politics from a very young
Hmm.
age. That's, my novels, got all of these characteristics. I followed it as a young kid very closely. As early as the 1960 election with Kennedy, I remember it, very well, that I was very eager to know how it turned out, and all of them since then. So, and when these memories, I always just thought I was born that way. I
Hmm.
mean, because it started at a very young age. And, but then when I began to remember this program, uh, I became very dubious about my interest in that arena. I just said, okay, no, I'm not gonna pursue that. I can't trust, because I was not, all that well put together. And I mean, I was functional, but I was messed up. I knew that I would never get married. I could date, but I was incapable of a long-term relationship because uh, I never thought I'd have it. Of course, I did a lot of, I mean, I've spent 30 years in
Mm.
healing, of all kinds of healing, uh, and, I did get married, and did have kids,
Excellent.
and a lot of things that were very hard, things that would make me very uneasy, that all went away as I began to
Mm.
heal. Uh, but the they would put me, but to become that, they wanted me to be a good student. So they would put me in this classroom, mock classroom, and then had this woman as the mock teacher. And, it was, draw squares on this piece of paper. And then if you don't make enough, this guy here, he'll bring you to the alligator outside.
Oh,
You know,
jeez.
that 4-year-old's going to believe
Wow.
that. So they would always, uh, there was always the sense that if you don't do what you're told, you're going to face a horrible death.
Mm.
And that had an enormous impact on me. And and then, like with sports, they would play this Nazi guy who worked at the death camps would throw baseballs at us, but
Oh my.
he would scream and threaten to
Oh,
kill you if you didn't catch it. And so
crazy.
I would just panic whenever I got involved with sports in junior high
Hmm.
school. My mind would just freeze up. Uh, One time I accidentally caught the ball in a football game. I mean, I usually was on the bench because the coach knew I wasn't very good, but he decided, got to put him in sometime. And I catch the ball and run to the wrong goal line. So so there's just so many aspects of my life. I couldn't pronounce words like the word scissor. I could never say
Huh.
it. And then when I remembered the incidents with the
Hmm.
scissor, then I could
It's
pronounce it.
very interesting that you
Um,
said they were somewhat grooming you to possibly be in a very powerful position, even president of the United States. From what I understand, these programs are multi-layered, multi-purposed, but one of the
right,
purposes is to program and groom powerful people to be in powerful positions, basically creating
right.
psychopaths.
I think you're right on. Because because I was exposed to the Indian boy, I never became the extreme social path that
Mm-hmm.
they may have
Mm.
wanted. Because he was a very my therapist said he was a contravening positive influence that had a very significant impact on the way you develop. But I did develop some of those
Mm,
tendencies of being the sociopath. I mean, in other words, where I wanted to get ahead at any cost, you know, so I could be ruthless if I wanted to.
mm,
And I always had empathy for people that I was exposed to, but not so much empathy for people that I was not exposed to. And again, those tendencies have gone away. And I was into destruction.
mm.
I would always build toy cities to bomb, you know, love nuclear war movies. It was, and I knew I was always worried, oh, if I actually become president, I'm not sure I trust myself.
Right.
So that was always, even before that, I remember the stuff. I just said, okay, I've got some kind of dark tendencies. And yeah, I think you're
Now,
right on.
earlier you mentioned that you even witnessed murdering of children. Is that right?
Yeah,
That is awful.
yeah. Again, I don't know if this was done by the psychopathic Nazi
Hmm.
guy that I think used to work at the death camps. Uh, uh, and I don't believe it was with the
Was
approval
it
of,
because he was
you know,
disobeying, or was it part of an experiment gone wrong? Do you know what the circumstances were?
yeah, I know what the circumstances were. In one case, I don't like to give too much of
Yeah,
the story away,
don't give too much
but
away,
yeah,
but
yeah. But in one case, someone tried to escape, get
mm,
away, and was going to call the
mm,
police.
I see.
So he met a very bad
Right.
death. And then in another case, it was similar, trying to escape
I see.
and met a very bad death. Uh, and
I was going to say, do you have any memories of what would be considered anything ritualistic, occult, satanic, things of that nature?
absolutely. And in fact, when we first began to remember what we eventually found out was likely MK Ultra, I mean, I can't say with 100% certainty they destroyed all the
Yeah.
records, but um, we called it the cult because we could remember some of the first memories were actually occult-like or satanic-like rituals where I would walk. They went to this chapel that was nearby the school, and they would have me walk to the altar where I would be laid down, and they would pour stuff on me, you know. And I remember seeing somebody dressed up in kind of a devilish-like outfit,
Mm.
So they were they were into that. The other aspect of it is I think there was some cults that were not, there's a significant influence from Germany. And I think there were some people from Germany that got us, that were into the occult that had connections with the CIA. And I think they would show up sometimes and do these
Mm.
ceremonies. Um, um, I call one of them the Baron in my novel, but I have a feeling that you had the guy that was running the program and the people that were very much part of uh, some of them part of what the CIA was into, and then other ones that had their own agenda. I mean, Alan Dulles and Stephen Kinzer quotes Alan Dulles saying, "If you don't want the president and the Congress to know, don't tell me."
Mm.
You know, of course, he knew a hell of a lot, as it turns out when you read Kisner's book. But I think these guys felt like they had a free reign to pursue their own
Mm.
agendas. And and as you know, Nazi Germany was deep into the occult. The SS was deep into the occult. I'm pretty certain these were former SS officers, so it would not be surprising. Well, actually, my therapist had studied that when he had spent time after World War II as a army therapist and not in Germany, and he he said, the way they tried to connect violence with sex and the way this occult stuff was these all telltale signs that CSS practice. So,
Right.
um,
N-
but again, I can't be sure about any of this,
Yeah.
100%.
Right.
But what was interesting, though, is we remembered these jail cells. We thought psychedelics, the electric shock, the sex abuse, uh, but we had no context. And then the President Clinton created the President's Commission on Radiation Experiments in, I think, 1995, somewhere around there. And one of the MK Ultra programs, well, basically what they did was they were looking at what the Army was doing with, outside of, for example, Las Vegas, setting off these nuclear devices that the public is exposed to. And so, and then they exposed, Army, soldiers and what such to radiation. Well, they found out that MK Ultra was sprinkling radiation on children's cereal and giving it to children. So they felt that they wanted to bring in some of these, what were now adults, but they had memories of that happening. And they found the records, I believe, that went on to testify.
Yeah.
And they did testify, but they said, can we talk about all the other stuff MK Ultra did to us? And that's when the jail cells and the psychedelics and the electric shock and the child sex abuse. And so my brother-in-law heard I think it was Coast to Coast or other program where these, people were explaining the things that happened to them, and it was identical to what happened to us. So he called me up and he says, you need to look into MK Ultra. Everything you've been saying, that's apparently what they were doing. So that's kind of how, we really then began to connect it with that. And then I don't know, I do have a site on my website where John Rappaport did an extensive article on those kids, on those testimonies, and he brought up all kinds of examples of things, including, I think, the programming of people to become political leaders.
Yeah.
And so it, we did have paranormal, don't know, they could have been created by the drugs.
I was going to ask you about
Larson
the paranormal experiences, some of the most profound that you had, and your thoughts about what it could really be.
Sure. So that's a very good question. After we remembered my mother, we actually had another profound memory before MK Ultra. And my sister had never forgotten it her whole life. In the summer of 1959, we went with my mother to Germany to visit my grandparents, and she said something. The family had a castle. My grandfather was a baron, my grandmother baroness. They had family castles, and she said something happened at the family castle, one of them. And she said, see if you can remember. So I was trying to think of, at that time, we were remembering our mother's bizarre behavior. It seemed like she was better then, but I was wondering, well, maybe she did something weird there. And I said, and then suddenly I had a memory of a alien-like creature staring at us behind a bush. And I thought, okay, that's way out there. So when I talked to her next, she said, so did you remember anything? And I said, I did, but it's really weird. I don't know that I even want to bring it up. And she goes, bring it up. I told her and she shrieked. And that was her memory.
Oh, wow.
So we used the exact same technique. What did to do? Where were you standing? Where was I standing? And she went around a bush ahead of us. We were walking back up the mountain trail to the castle from the car. She wanted to get ahead of us, and because we were pokey and along, she went, and when I came around this curve, I saw her, and then I saw that thing staring at her.
Wow.
And then I screamed, "What's that?" And then she looked at it and she screamed. And it seemed to be interdimensional. Maybe it was wearing a reflective suit. you know?
Wow.
So, I mean, again, I know there's so many ways to explain a kind of experience like that. Uh, but I felt that, yeah, you could see through it. And then, once we remembered that, we remembered that these creatures showed up at our home that we lived in just before or just after we went into the MK
Do
Ultra
you know if that
program.
happened around the
And
same time that you were going through the programs?
the second one
Yeah.
did, yeah, would have happened immediately before, immediately after.
Okay.
And the other one happened the next summer. Uh, um, and then I have memories of I've worked more on retrieving my memories than my
Hmm.
sister, and so I had more memories of them at the program as well.
Similar creatures?
And the
Oh,
same
wow.
looking creature, same looking creature. I mean, I do have a vague memory of once, but I'm not sure about it. A reptilian type, and most of them look like, as I said at the time, the cover of Whitley Strieber's Communion. At that time that was a big book, and but I do know that they did screen
Hmm.
memories. That the CIA, didn't want people to remember, and I think one of your guests recently talked about kids dressing up like aliens. So that the idea is that if people remember the
Yeah.
stuff, uh, I do think that people that are subjected to extreme trauma and disassociate have an enhanced ability to see realities beyond our own. This thing seemed to be shocked that we could
Oh,
see it.
wow. There's a very interesting layer seemingly connected to MK Ultra. People that claim to have been involved in the secret space program. This is a very strange and multi-layered phenomenon where these people claim to, from an early age, been subjected to similar programs and torture and horrible things like you were, but eventually they would join this secret military group, this secret space program, where they would claim to have missions off planet and be sent to different dimensions and actually interact with extraterrestrials. There's many different schools of thought about what could really be happening here. Many think that they were given the screen memories to make them believe that they had these experiences so that they could then perpetuate an alien narrative. Others believe that maybe they were having some sort of interdimensional experiences, but it is very strange, but it seems to be somewhat connected to these MK Ultra programs. Have you heard anything about these?
Well, I certainly have heard about what you're just
Hmm.
discussing. I think they occurred a little bit
Yes.
later
Yeah.
in the timeline. MK Ultra was shut down in '64 by Lyndon Johnson, but they continued MK
Yeah.
search. They were obsessed with the psychic stuff, and that went on to the '90s when they admitted it on Nightline,
Yeah.
ABC Nightline, and the but so I've heard of that. I do know that my brother seemed to have been groomed for some sort of military career.
Mm.
That seemed to have been the focus with him. He always wanted to, from a young age, he was always interested in the big tough guy
Hmm.
heroes, you know, uh, and loved that and wanted to join the military right away. And then my sister was, I think, really very involved in the psychedelic
I was going to
program.
ask you,
They
what
really,
different programs were your siblings subjected to?
yeah. I think that my brother it appears to be
Hmm.
military. From a young age, he always wanted to fight. He wanted to be like my Cub Scout group. I was older than him, but he wanted to challenge all the other Cub Scouts in my. He wanted to beat them up.
Yeah.
And he would just go wild, and then he would break down into a bad asthma
Mm.
attack. He would get so frenzied about fighting, he would start gasping for breath, and my mother would have to bring him inside and put on the steam machine to get him calmed down. So there seemed to have been a really kind of phonetic aspect to this. So having not been subjected to those kind of
Mm.
experiments, I wasn't there with them. I'm just surmising. I think something like that was done. And then my sister, you know, super left brain, super creative.
Mm.
And again, she got swept up, in the 60s counterculture movement and used lots of, used psychedelics. I mean, and of course, it's ironic that that whole thing happened. I mean, I know you know about, you know, Timothy
Yeah.
Leary saying everything I am, I owe to the foresight of the CIA scientist. And the CIA, I mean, basically Stephen Kesner, and then I know you've heard of John Marks's Search for the Manchurian Candidate. They both concluded that, MK Ultra, the CIA, created the drug revolution and the counterculture movement by sending all these drugs to all these
Hmm.
universities. And so it's kind of eerie that that's, but my sister did get swept up in that. So she realized that it was not a good direction and pulled out of it,
Yeah.
by the time she was in her early adulthood. Um, but yeah, those are the three things that I think different ways that they used us. Mine was this political,
Mm.
obsession. And
What was your life
um,
like before you started to retrieve the memories, and how did you go about your healing journey?
so, I think I was something of a loner, you know. Um, I and actually studying, being a student was quite as there was a lot of trauma around going to school. My palms would always sweat. My mind would sometimes freeze up. So I actually initially was very erratic. I would be the worst kid in the class, or second to the worst kid in the class, and then all of a sudden be one of the top three kids in the class. I went from being in special education to accelerated classes because somehow when I could calm myself down, master the fear that was always associated with schools, because it was very much a school type place where we went to in this MK Ultra program. Uh, I mean, it had a lot of radical differences being kept in jail cells, but it had that feeling. And uh, um, um, it so I eventually became a good student and stayed a good student. But at work, giving presentations, like the idea of doing a podcast like this, see, those things terrified me to a degree that I would lose my
Mm.
voice when I spoke. And so I was kind of a weird duck. So that's part of what the book
Hmm.
shows, how all three of them, how it affected them, how they were different from, quote, normal kids. We always felt. I connected with the title Stranger in a Strange
Hmm.
Land,
Yeah.
the book, about the guy, uh, uh, Martian. Um, so the healing journey initially was, of course, once these memories began to come back, and then my brother had a psychotic breakdown and he had to have a therapist. Eventually, I decided I needed a therapist as well. Uh, you know, I made that decision bef just before the MK Ultra stuff started to
Hmm.
break. And um, and so talk therapy, was very beneficial. It resulted in progress. The vast majority of our memories we remembered on our own, but sometimes the talk therapy would trigger it.
Did you do any
And then when
hypnotic
I moved,
regression, anything like that? Hmm.
absolutely. So I'm a certified
Oh,
hypnotist,
great.
EFT practitioner, and Reiki master. So yeah, when I moved out to California and then I got a therapist there, I was exposed to hypnotherapy and EMDR, and those were very powerful techniques to help me. I had most of the memories already, but she could bring me back to these experiences and then as sort of work
Hmm.
through it, release it. Cathartic is the word I was searching for. Cathartic, and that really then began to make me feel a lot more comfortable. I actually, rather than not wanting to socialize. I wanted to socialize. It was very effective. Right now, the thing that my biggest challenge is, my therapist that I had said, the last place trauma resides is the body.
Mm-hmm.
You've done a lot to get it removed from your mind, to get it removed from your emotions. But I was having a number of different symptoms that indicated I had trapped memories and in the body. So I'm working with a somatic therapist now,
Right.
and um, you know, trying to release that, some of the symptoms and I've had a number of different physical symptoms that have completely gone away, you know, as I made progress, but they haven't all gone away. So that's it. It's when you have this kind of multi-layered damage, and actually, the alien experience in some ways was some of the most terrifying. And I use that word not knowing what they are. Unidentified, anomalous phenomenon, I think is the term
Do you
that's
still
being
have any
used.
strange experiences similar to that?
I really after after I after that time period, no, other than one experience is when I was a young adult with my mother and my brother. We were driving through West Texas, coming back from visiting my sister who lived up in Washington State, and 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 my mother said, "Look out for that gigantic wolf."
Hmm.
We were going 70 miles an hour, and this wolf was keeping pace with us,
Wow.
and it was bigger than a normal wolf. It was somewhere between a dog, somewhere almost the size of a cow. And it literally jumped on the hood of our car,
Whoa.
got ahead of us and jumped in the hood of the car. Its face stared us right through the windshield,
Wow.
and then it flew
That's
off.
crazy.
And I thought, what in the world is this? And and I asked my mother, who had, no interest in the paranormal, but she described the exact same thing. My brother described the exact same
Mm.
thing. So when we stopped at a hotel, we didn't want to stop. It was terrifying. Not a dent was in the
Mm.
car, no blood, nothing.
Mm.
So I knew it was some sort of bizarre. And I know that, quote, alien experiences, they sometimes plant these memories of seeing some kind of animal, I've read that. That's what I understand of that, but I don't have a memory of an alien experience
Yeah.
there. And yeah, a shamanic creature, is probably what it felt most like. It had that feeling to
Right.
it. So I've talked to a few other people. I had you know, and I was kind of stunned when I started sharing this. About 2 years ago, I actually just kind of kept it a secret for years, other than telling my therapist. I Several of the people I talked to had very similar
Mm.
experiences.
Earlier in my
Yeah.
introduction, I had mentioned how, in my perspective, the experiments that were occurring in the 50s, 60s, and 70s with the MK Ultra programs and the offshoots were most likely preparation for what we're experiencing now. It seems that they may be implementing the experimentation through technology and drugs and a mass mind control operation. You look at the overall state of society, where we are, and our reliance on technology, blind trust we have with our institutions at times. Just in the past few years, we've started to get revelations of how corrupt our systems and government and global leaders are. It wouldn't be surprising if all the experimentation that was done was to achieve global power and control over the masses. What do you think about that?
Well, that's definitely possible. One thing I'll point out: are you familiar with Naomi Klein's book, The Shock Doctrine?
No.
Okay, so she's a very respected Canadian
Mm.
journalist. So she researched MK Ultra. Actually, they made a movie about the book. Came out, I think it was 2007, and got an Academy Award. Uh, the documentary either nomination and maybe even won it. But she basically says that, she talks about the things that we've been talking about and the things that were done to people. And then she talks about how they created this quote, for lack of a better word, MK Ultra manual, that the CIA had, and that actually it's been used. So the cases she gives is that in South America, when the CIA overthrew the governments in Argentina and Chile, they used the MK Ultra manual to control the populations, so they could put in a military dictatorship. And the shock doctrine means you put people into a state of shock,
Yeah.
so they can't resist.
Well, I have to think of the major psychological operations that have become obvious over the years: the assassination of JFK, 9/11, COVID. To me, those seem like shock operations to elicit emotional reactions in order to control the masses, which seems like pretty much the same thing.
Could be. I mean, it's interesting that her book gets into, in both China and Russia, when they wanted to move to a free market system, they actually got advice from the CIA and used some of those techniques. And I remember I met a guy from China when they were introducing the free market economy. He lived there, but I ran into him, and he was a guest at our house, and he says, it's just crazy. They've just stripped away everything overnight. The entire social net is gone. And everybody is just walking around stunned. So we're going along with this. Now, as it turned out, from a pure economic standpoint, their economy flourished, with the free market economy compared to what went on under Mao. It was, very, very poor economic situation. But so, they said that. So when we were in Chile, my wife and I were in Chile. The tour company we were with has what they call a controversial discussion. And the guy that came talk to us talked about the CIA and how they overthrew the government, put military dictatorship, and then he found out that his grandfather was involved with that, and that he was using those, quote, CIA techniques on political opponents and on the whole population. So it's very interesting. One thing my father was a history professor. I was obsessed with going into becoming president, so I read lots of books about history. History does repeat itself, and we have been in periods like this before, where it's just so everything that's happening. Actually, I would say my book has got the backdrop of the late 1960s and early 70s, and 1,500 campus bombings. They have to shut down the universities one year because they lose control, most of them. Most of the big cities have huge areas that are burnt to the ground because of enormous unrest. Every night on the TV, it was just violence and violence and violence. I remember sitting in high school at lunch, and we would say, so is this country going to be here when we graduate? So, it was because I was so attuned to this stuff because of my political interest. It rivals what we're going through now. It was like the Vietnam War, we didn't have the huge political divide, but we had an enormous generational divide. Very divisive. You go back to the American Civil War and read about what that was like the pre-Nazi era. The World War II, Great Depression and World War II. If you look at the Gallup poll taken in November of 1941, 85% of the American public wanted Hitler to take over all of Europe.
Yeah.
Pearl Harbor changed all of that within a month. But so I would just want to be cautious with reaching conclusions, knowing that we have been through some really difficult periods, almost cyclical. a book called The Fourth Turning points out how almost every 90 years we find ourselves in what he calls the chaos
Mm.
period. He wrote this book in 97, and he said in the 2020s we will have an enormous political division, enormous divide between the wealthy and the poor, enormous anti-immigration feeling, uh, um, uh, uh, and the government, people losing complete confidence and trust.
Mm.
He said that's what's going to happen in the 2020s. He says the reason is because about every 90 years it comes around. However, you have a point, because of the CIA and all the things that they've done. And a lot of people say, first, you had COVID. What's next? Aliens? Heard people say that
Yeah.
sometimes. You know, and there could well be. Uh, I mean, I would not be shocked throughout all of history. The elite would love to have control of the masses.
Right. Well, it's most likely
And
cyclical and corruption. There's probably a little bit of both. If you look at the level of corruption that has been revealed just in the past 5 years that our government is willing to participate in, it brings a whole new light and awareness of the possibilities of how dark that control system can get. You start
right,
looking at
right,
things like your story, and it leads to a web of corruption that is very disheartening. And you have to separate
right,
yourself from that and know that
right,
there are good people. That's not a
right,
complete top down evil power structure that's controlling the planet, but they have very bad actors that are in positions of power that are pulling strings in negative directions. But like you said, there's a
right,
cyclical aspect to it
right.
as well.
Yeah, I mean, the Indian boy who knew a lot about all the different religions, would often talk about the Zen philosophy that this is a dualistic
Hmm.
world. The Zen symbol is there's light and darkness, but an equal amount of both. That the reality, yeah, the language we've got, you can't have good without bad. You can't have tall without short. You can't have beautiful without ugly. That this reality, is sort of almost guaranteeing that there's going to be a dualistic
Hmm.
aspect to it. And, perhaps, there's lessons to be learned from that are advancing us at a soul level.
I would have to agree.
Uh, and when some people bring that up, I say, when they train pilots and they use simulations to fly their planes, I said, so are they always going to have blissful weather? Or do they become good pilots because they get some really bad
Yeah.
situations? So I don't know, but I think that but it is very disheartening. It is very frustrating, and but there's a lot of good,
Hmm.
and so you have to look at that as well. I mean, these healing techniques we're witnessing. Uh, uh, so in my book, the position I take in my book is that I'm not going to tell people what's going on. I'm going to share
Hmm.
experiences or memories of MK Ultra. But then people need to reach their, for example, in that whole alien thing, I have the therapist give the protagonist all kinds of theories of what that could be. And as you know, there's
Yeah.
many.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And it's and the government seems to be playing sometimes both sides of that coin. That's what's so
It
confusing.
is. We're in very interesting times. The last few minutes, is there anything that we didn't get to that you'd like to share with the audience or any final thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would think that, one of the things that's learned about the government is that, the Eisenhower and the Kennedy administration are not the administrations you would have expected for this kind of stuff to
Right.
go on. But, they did have an opportunity to gain, it was suggested that they get some sort of oversight over the US, the CIA, but the CIA resisted, so they just gave
Mm.
up, I mean, eventually they got, after it all came
Yeah.
out, they got plenty of it. And one thing I'll mention about the CIA is that, you've got bad actors there, but you've got good people there too. They're like everything else. And I've had several CIA people read my book, and they've actually been pretty supportive. They were familiar with that dark past, dark
Yeah.
chapter. And I met one guy who knew some of those people.
Mm.
At the time, he didn't know what they were doing, but he says once he learned what they were doing, he wasn't surprised. Um, I think if I want to put forward a message, is that healing is possible. Despite all the bad things that can happen. Uh, uh, I do know that I've had some advantages other people don't have, but these techniques like hypnotherapy, EFT, which is based. Are you familiar with
Hmm.
EFT, the
Yes.
tapping? They've really helped me overcome a lot of obstacles. Like when I would feel uneasy at work about having to do something, I would do that. So you don't have to be in an MK Ultra program to get benefit from a lot of these techniques. A lot of people remember their past, but they may not have, released it. So it's still driving behavior. Um, and I think though, so the book is designed to hopefully, and it's a series. And so there's going to be another one coming up that's going to deal more with the Indian boy.
Right.
And there's some really advanced concepts that will be coming through that, on the awakening
Right on.
side. So um, uh, I know, I believe I've heard you say you meditate, those kind of things can be very, very helpful
Hmm.
walking in nature to deal with these, because I have a group where we do EFT together,
Hmm.
which enhances its power. And actually, my wife and I want to put out a book about
Oh, wow.
that when you do EFT in a group, it's kind of like group prayer. But what so many people want to tap on is the times. I mean, their own life, but, living in these difficult
Mm.
times. So,
Right on. Well, Bill, thank you so much. This is essential information. Before you go, let the audience know how they can pick up your book and find out more about you.
um, yeah, it's available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and many other online outlets. It's so it's not in bookstores at this point, but it's very available online. You can go to my website, BillYarborough.com, YARBOROUGH.com. And as more information, I mean, you can buy the book from there, but you can definitely, it's got a learn more about MK Ultra and the books that I recommend, and some articles on healing as well and different techniques. I did a column on healing. So,
Excellent. Bill, thank you so much. Definitely love to talk again. There's much more we can get to, especially if you got some more books coming
great,
out. And until next time,
great.
everyone, have an excellent evening. We will talk again tomorrow. If you're looking to start your therapeutic microdosing journey, but don't know where to start, especially when looking for the highest quality ingredients, including nootropics, and what you'd expect from a true microdose capsule, check out our friends at Brainsupreme. They offer the absolute highest quality ingredients so you can start your microdosing journey knowing that you're getting top-notch ingredients. To find out more, visit their website using that link right in the description, and you can get 15% off your entire order. Are you and your family prepared for an emergency? Maybe the fake alien invasion? Now is the time to prepare yourself and your family for any event. Check out Prep Starts Now. Their mission is to provide high-quality preparedness products that empower individuals and families to be ready for any situation. They're committed to delivering reliable, trusted gear to ensure your safety, security, and peace of mind in times of need. Their product selection is carefully curated to provide you with the essential gear you need to stay prepared. From emergency kits to tactical tools, every item is chosen for its reliability and practicality. Prep Starts Now understands the importance of family, and their goal is to equip you with everything you need to build a solid plan for your family's preparedness. In today's ever-changing world, being prepared is more important than ever, And Prep Starts Now is here to help you and your family stay ready with quality products and practical guidance. Use the link in the description and get 15% off your order.